Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad with NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Implementation and Scale Up webinar series. Today's topic is statewide cross-sector implementation and the new sector planning and implementation team benchmarks of quality tool, presented by Ashley McNish and Beth Borhaus from Vanderbilt University. Thank you, and please proceed.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Beth Borhaus, and I am with the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about the new tool for the sector implementation and planning team. I work with several states and state leaders as a pyramid model consultant, and have been a member of the state of Tennessee's leadership team for 12 years. As you see on my picture, I'm hanging out with a pet. That is my dog, Toby. And in my free time, I love doing dog obedience and participating in dog sports. I'll pass it to Ashley, my co-presenter today.
Thanks, Beth. I'm Ashley McNish, also a staff member with the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. And along with Beth, I have supported a lot of states, but more in their Part C, I guess what we've been calling sector planning and implementation teams. So I've worked with multiple states in that area, and I too am an animal lover. Beth and I decided to share our pets. This is Zelda, my puppy. And yeah, I think we can get started.
Thanks, Ashley. So as we start today, I realized, oh my gosh, we have acronyms all over the place. It just starts with NCPMI, but I now have announced what that is, and so has Victor. But I thought I would go through a couple of the other acronyms that you will hear Ashley and I say today. We will attempt not to be using other acronyms, but if we happen to use one that you are not familiar with, please put it in chat and we will define what we are saying. So the main acronym you will hear us use today is SPLIT, and it does stand for Sector Planning and Implementation Team. Those of you that are familiar with the benchmarks of quality, the BoQ, we will talk about the split BoQ, that is the new tool. And we'll also mention the state BoQ because we'll do some comparisons and talking about how they can work in tandem. Also, we will surely say SLT at least once or twice. That's the state leadership team. Two other common acronyms that we use is PDN for Professional Development Network, and then PICS, PIC, which is the Program Implementation Coach. Again, if you have questions along the way, throw them in chat. Ashley and I will be watching chat and hopefully answer your questions today, or if not, you can find us both at sessions at NTI, and we will be glad to answer your questions. So as we get started, just want to kind of review the goals for today. We are going to define what a cross-sector state leadership team is. We're going to talk about strategies of how we can have meaningful cross-sector state-level work happening in states. We will also talk about why Ashley and I landed and NCPMI landed on having a split, a sector planning and implementation team, and we will then talk about the new BoQ that is built for the sector planning and implementation team. So we have a word of the day that we want you to remember, and it is adapt. And this is for you to think about as we talk about this new tool and the work of a sector within states, that you can adapt this tool and how we're talking in the strategies for your state and your system. Because what we know is all states are different. Lots of states have state leadership teams, some don't. We'll talk about how a team can use this tool if they don't have the state leadership team. We also know pyramid model implementation across different sectors looks different. There's different ways to implement pyramid model, and so we will discuss that and how the split BoQ can support that work. And with this tool, it can be adapted to meet your team's needs. That's a state leadership team, maybe a sector team. And so as you listen to us talk about the tool and sector implementation, think about how this could work for your state, your province, your programs as we move forward. And so as we get started, kind of want to level the playing field and define what a cross-sector state leadership team is. Take a moment and read the definition on the screen. So there's a couple bolded, highlighted words in the definition. And when we think about that, there is some impact that these words have for pyramid model implementation. The first one you see is cross-sector collaboration, which they say 2 or more organizations working together. For us in the pyramid model, this helps us define what a sector is. For us, a sector is defined as entities or programs, organizations that provide services to children and families. They can be funded and regulated by different systems. And so, for example, we can talk about public pre-K, we can talk about childcare, Part C, early intervention, family childcare, Head Start, early Head Start, tribal nations, and other program settings that are serving and supporting young children and families. Then the next set of bolded words, the cross-sector partnership, is just like a state leadership team. If a state has one, this leadership team can leverage resources and funding to work toward shared goals and advocate for pyramid model work across the state. So that is what we see as a cross-sector team, is putting all those pieces together and working together to implement pyramid model across the state. So this is one of the resources that is part of the webinar series that you can click and see. This is a pyramid model cross-sector visual. We know visuals can help us understand the big picture in pyramid model, and hopefully this one will help. So as we think about pyramid model and state implementation, we think about essential structures. And so you see on this visual, the essential structures are all there. At the very top, there's the state leadership team. There's the professional development network, program implementation coaches and trainers. There's implementation sites, and there's data and evaluation down at the bottom. At the very top is the state leadership team that provides the collaboration and coordination and advocacy for all things pyramid model in a state. I want you to focus for a moment on the red lines and arrows that kind of encompasses the entire visual. It takes data at all the essential structure levels and any sector implementing pyramid model to be able to successfully implement, collaborate, and coordinate, and to get the pyramid model to practitioners, children, and families. And if you'll see, there's a box in the middle. If you would click, I think it will pop up yellow for us on the screen. That is the sector planning and implementation team, the split. And in that light blue area, you can see all those sectors that I mentioned earlier, where they can be implemented, the different sectors. And if you notice, there is other on the far right of your screen, and that other is this can be adapted to your state. So that's the whole different sectors that are possible. And then as you notice, there's blue arrows, and those blue arrows are connecting that sectors don't have to work alone. They can be all one under a state leadership team, or they can be implemented as a split. And we'll talk about that as we move forward today. Each sector can do the implementation work in their sector and then report back to the state. So you see those red lines come up and the blue lines as well. And each sector can have a PDN of program implementation coaches and trainers. And they can also work cross-sector. So we can train, for example, you could be training in public pre-K and also in Head Start, and they can use the same trainers and program implementation coaches. So each sector can implement their own or use across to the sectors. And then you'll also notice that under the implementation, the program implementation coaches, you can see community-wide implementation. And this can be made up of multiple sectors working together. The more I've gotten to show this visual to pyramid model implementers across the country, they really comment on how community-wide implementation is really that connection of cross-sector work. It is pulling all the sectors together to work in a community, and has been a real strength of working and pulling the split BoQ together, as well as thinking about the community-wide BoQ, which we do connect in the split BoQ as we talk about. As we introduce the split benchmarks of quality, we're going to highlight each of these essential structures with the level of communication and collaboration pathways, between the sector and the SLT, because we know that when we are coordinating and collaborating across all sectors and there's a body that is holding it together, advocating for the work, we can be more successful. So remember, here comes our word of the day. This can be adapted to your state. The visual linked in the webinar materials today, and then we're going to move ahead, and Ashley is going to talk more about the sector planning and implementation team.
Thanks, Beth. So I know navigating cross-sector work can sometimes feel like a challenge. I know Beth and I were inspired to work on this creation of this tool actually years ago. In our experience with Beth supporting more of like a cross-sector team and me supporting more of a split team working with leaders in Part C early intervention, we were kind of seeing, I guess, different scenarios. So I think at the beginning of our journey, um, is we would find maybe there were pyramid model state leadership teams that had been functioning for a while, and maybe they had established well into their public pre-K system, for example, or their early child care system, and that sector team was kind of leading the work. So they would then add on Part C early intervention, and so I would be working with that team one-on-one, and they would be working on things like getting recruitment for their PDN, all those essential structures that Beth talked about, recruitment of implementation sites, setting up training, and they were getting things done. And then they were leaders from that team then joining the cross-sector team, but kind of feeling like they didn't have a place. Or we would hear there were partners on the cross sector leadership team that didn't really understand what their role was or why. And we understand like every state sets up when and how their teams meet. And I think in our experience, a lot of the time, although there are many ways how it can look, is if a team is meeting monthly, there's not a lot of time, maybe that's monthly for an hour and a half to 2 hours. When you have multiple implementing groups to really come together and get things done. So, for example, if we have childcare and Part C early intervention and Head Start and public pre-K all implementing pyramid model, and they have trainings coming on and they need to talk details, that's not going to be able to happen at a cross-sector meeting. And so we were kind of seeing this evolve into really that collaboration and coordination has to happen at that top at these cross-sector meetings. And then we need to create space where each of those sectors have an opportunity to meet and talk and plan. And so I know one question is, well, that's a lot of meetings. So again, um, Beth and I, thinking of adapt, the word of the day is these are just options and tools where you all have choice in how you set these things up. So perhaps your sector teams are meeting monthly and your cross-sector team meets quarterly so that you can really support the ongoing work, and then you're coming together and you're collaborating. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that collaboration can look like. But really, we want to create a space where it's kind of like I think of it as Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's like the right fit. We don't want a cross-sector leadership team meeting being at one end of the spectrum where, like I said, it's maybe one lead agency that is doing the implementation and everyone is showing up, but they're like, okay, I'm a busy person. Why am I here? What's the ask? And then we don't want it on the other side of the spectrum where everyone's implementing, but there's no communication and coordination happening and everyone's stressed out. So kind of thinking through as we go today how you might use the split tool to divide and conquer so that your work can be very focused. So when do we convene a split team? So when we go through the BOQ, you'll see how we set it up. But like I said, if you have multiple sectors in a state that are implementing the pyramid model, um, this could, if you are actively planning on implementing, um, where you do need to figure out training schedules and who your coaches are and who your implementation sites are. Um, that is a great pathway to convene a split team so that you can focus on those very more detailed steps around getting things up and running. Um, I know I've also worked with teams, or sometimes like some states I have worked with, Part C early intervention was the leading sector team to even start a pyramid model leadership team. So maybe there's one sector that's starting out, and the split is just a really great tool to get them up and running as they plan as a long-term goal of adding on more sectors and moving to the state BOQ and that cross-sector collaboration. Another great way to use the split is if you have other sectors who are part of your cross-sector team, they want to implement, maybe they're just not there yet, whether it's because of funding or capacity or but they would maybe like to do some exploratory work to see what is it that we have to have in place in order to take these next steps towards implementation. So maybe they might convene a team to look through the split and kind of see what is this process and what do we have to plan for. Um, so that said, you will find as we go through the split today, we really don't want this to be siloed. So I hope the impression isn't that we're telling you to work in silos, but it's that constant communication and collaboration where, yes, you might be working as a split team because there might be sector specific um, barriers or problem solving that has to be done that can't happen at that cross sector level, but that there is constant communication and coordination with that SLT. And so we'll talk through what that can look like. Who are the members of a split team? So obviously, if we're saying, hey, you have this cross sector coordinated state leadership team and you have this split team, not everyone on the split team needs to be a part of that cross-sector team. So typically there are a few leaders from this team that can join those cross-sector meetings to make sure that the coordination and collaboration is happening at the top. But then this team is made up of members who are specific to that early childhood sector. Um, and I forgive me if a lot of my examples are Part C early intervention. That's my that's my work. But the people that know kind of the ins and outs of that specific sector. So you will have that lead who, again, is a part of this team. Maybe they're facilitating this team, but then they're also joining the cross sector. You might have some practitioners. So these would be early interventionists, teachers, childcare workers who are the recipients of some of these services and who are trained to use pyramid model practices that can inform what is happening. You may have family members. So I know there may be parent organizations who are who interact regularly with your specific sector. There may even be families, again, who are recipients of the services of that sector that can inform family engagement at that level. You also may have program implementation coaches. Um, Typically, so in my experience, sometimes when we start out with a team, we may have all the program implementation coaches and a sector lead or a trainer on the team. Over time, it may evolve. So I'll talk a little bit about size and being aware of that. Um, you may also have trainers. Now, this could be the role of the program implementation coach, or maybe you identify separate trainers. So, for example, I know that in some of the implementation sites in Part C that I've worked with, they're starting to identify, thinking about capacity, that maybe it's a lot for their program implementation coaches to do coaching and training. And maybe they're identifying a practitioner coach or a staff member who's really passionate about training and really knows those pyramid model practices that they could train to do that. And so identifying who those people might be. And then as you recruit implementation sites, you may have leaders from those sites as part of this team, again, to really inform the process of what is happening at the implementation site level that this team needs to be aware of when making decisions. Um, and then perhaps there's other organizations who may be invested in promoting social emotional skills. I know there's a state that I work with that has mental health, and I know Head Start and Early Head Start do this a lot as well, like mental health consultants that they're connected with in their sector that could maybe inform some of their work as well. You want to, just like with the cross-sector team, you want to be mindful of the size. So, like I said, it may start like all your program coaches. Maybe you start with 3 coaches, um, are all a part of the team. But over time, as you grow, maybe there's one lead program implementation coach who is a part of these meetings. And you want to find out what's the process for them sharing back information to the program implementation coaches, as an example. Um, Reason being is that you really want these discussions to be focused, and to be able to take action. And sometimes when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, we never get to a decision because we're just talking about it. And so thinking, who's a part of that team, who can take action, is something you're going to want to think about when planning.
Thanks, Ashley. And a lot of that is I hear parts of that too many cooks in the kitchen happening at the state leadership team level too. And so it's helping this work get done is having the right people at the table. So thank you so much for digging into those components that are so important for a sector team, but also as we still are not forgetting the state leadership team as well. So we are going to dig in to the sector planning and implementation team benchmarks of quality. From here on out, I am going to call it the split BOQ to save myself lots of words and getting tongue-tied. I have just put into chat a link to challengingbehavior.org with the split BOQ so you can follow along, because we are going to highlight some of the critical elements and benchmarks as we go. We're going to look at each essential structure. And so if you have it handy that you can look at on your screen, it might make it a little easier than following along with just our screenshots. So Ashley, you can go on to the next page. And so really, Ashley has really highlighted the importance of the split. When we have a team that has a state leadership team, a state with an SLT, the tool is intended to be used in collaboration. Having a sector that is working can use the split and inform its work, but it also can inform the state of what is happening in the sector. If the state doesn't have a state leadership team, a sector can be implementing on their own. I think Ashley actually works with a state that only has Part C early intervention happening with Pyramid at this moment. And they're using and looking at the split just on their own, not within a state leadership team situation. And so the key here is the split is the BOQ is used by the split to assess their status. Where are they with implementation? How are they going to start if they're just exploring and really digging into the initial planning and implementation? And it's going to be looking at those critical elements that they can plan and establish and determine what it's going to look like over a multiple time frame, over years, using implementation science to systematically build the systems and put them into place so we can sustain pyramid model in a state. The tool itself is always thinking, as we created it, to always be thinking about pathways where sectors can cross over and do work together and in collaboration. And remember that word of the day, that adapt, is using it to meet your needs as a state. Ashley really put that clearly when she talked about how early intervention might be just starting out. And so it's a good tool just as a planning tool. And that's why that planning is in our title, that we didn't just go with a sector leadership team, because we know some states, once that sector gets up and running, it is all run from the state leadership team level. It's not run at the split level per se. And so that's why the PL is in the middle of split for that planning piece. And so we really think the use of this is really to inform action planning and thinking about sector implementation to pull some of the work off the state leadership team. And so just like the state benchmarks of quality, it's rooted in implementation and science. It is framed by the 4 essential structures. There's critical elements and benchmarks for each of the essential structures. The scoring is just the same. 0 is not in place, 1 is emerging, and 2 is in place. And thanks to our amazing friend Myrna at NCPMI, we have an Excel form, just like the state benchmarks of quality, so you can maintain your data from year to year and have wonderful graphs to put that together as well. And so next time Ashley is talking, I will put the Excel link in as well. I've just not coordinated it talking and putting things in chat at the same time. One point here to make too with the split is we think that we have an incredibly important critical element, and I would say the most important critical element at each essential level, and that title is the split SLT coordination and collaboration. And we will talk about that each time we talk about the essential structures today, because that is key, that we're not working in silos, that we're working together with the state team as well as cross-sector work. You can go on to the next slide, Ashley. So those of you that might have watched my webinar with Angie Van Polen with the state introducing the revised state benchmarks of quality, this slide might look very familiar. I really want to highlight that this split BoQ is not a fidelity tool. It is meant to inform current practice in sectors and then future action planning. There's also, just like the state benchmarks of quality, a priority column on the benchmarks for teams to decide what is the priority and or indicate what's not a priority as they're going through scoring the benchmarks. And the other thing is I found really handy too is sometimes having team members complete the split BoQ on their own and decide what they think is priority, and then come back and with the team and have a real good conversation about what that priority is, kind of a conversation starter as well. So really have covered this already. As we've said, there's some commonalities and similarities between the state benchmarks of quality as well as the split BoQ. But one of the main things is just making sure things are really focused on the sector. So the essential structures, the replacement for SLT becomes the split. And then professional development network and of trainers and program implementation coaches is the same. And then it's sector implementation sites. And then, of course, data-informed decision-making is key on both the state BoQ as well as the split BoQ. So let's start looking at this, and we'll look at the essential structures, starting with the state planning and implementation team. And you'll notice the critical elements on the right hand of your screen. If you're familiar with the state benchmarks of quality, these will look very familiar. We have membership and logistics, action planning, sustainability and scale up, as well as communication and visibility. Then that most important critical element of the split SLT, coordination and collaboration. And each one of the critical elements, of course, has benchmarks underneath them. And so you'll see the similarities here. If you look at benchmark number 3, is the split identifies a team coordinator, co-coordinators to represent the split, work with the team members to facilitate the work of the split, and to coordinate the activities of the professional development network of program implementation coaches, trainers, and communication with the SLT. This is just like in the state benchmarks of quality where you have coordinators or co-coordinators to facilitate the work. A sector planning team needs someone to kind of lead up and organize the work, and that's what those coordinators would do. And then item number 10, the split identifies funding sources to cover implementation activities. Funds can be cost shared, rated, layered, or from community coordinated resources and are supported by the SLT. It is always looking back, connecting to the SLT. Sectors, right now in our world, we see some sectors having more opportunity to have funding than others. And this is a place where we can start looking at where can we share some funding? Where can that cross-sector work continue? And so we really want to highlight that coordination throughout the BoQ because we do not want to silo what we're doing. When I mentioned too, back on the last one, Ashley, you're fine.
Okay.
We intentionally looked at benchmarks to engage community. And so benchmark number 17 is the split engages in community outreach programs or agencies to serve children and families. And efforts can include building partnerships with community leaders to encourage community-wide implementation. And we actually, in the split BoQ, link to the community-wide benchmarks because we feel like the starting of sector work lends itself directly into community-wide work. But that is just one point of that community-wide implementation that's key. And if you think back to our visual earlier, we really are making those connections between the sectors. And as you review and reflect on this new tool, we encourage you to think about the coordination and planning, implementation, data collection, oversight that it takes to implement the pyramid model in just one sector. And as you think about that, you'll begin to realize why this sector planning and implementation BoQ might be a good way to kind of support the work, yet make those coordinations and connections between sectors. So you can hop on to the next one. And remember, I said the most important critical element? Here we go. So for each essential structure, there is a critical element of coordination and collaboration with the SLT. And you'll also note, and if you'll click one more time, Ashley, that as I said, we know that some states do not have a state leadership team. And if that is the case in this item, and then the items, you can see the numbers on the screen for the other essential structures, you will be able to score an A on your scoring because you don't have that SLT. But for teams that do, the example here is number 20 for this essential structure. And this is important that the team coordinator serves as a member of the state leadership team to share the work of the split and communicate the state leadership team's initiatives back to the split. Again, we're always keeping in mind those red arrows around the essential graphic that we showed at the beginning, that the split and the leadership team work together. It can be more than one member, but we want to make sure those connections exist. And so Ashley is going to jump on to the next essential structure and tell you a little bit more.
Thank you, Beth. So again, I know Beth and I probably sound like a broken record where we say we highly encourage coordination when it makes sense. And the Professional Development Network, PDN of trainers and program implementation coaches in different sectors, this might be shared because there may be a similar background knowledge. I'm just thinking public preschool, Head Start, childcare may have similar trainings that they're doing, or maybe they're using the same type of classroom-based benchmarks of quality with local implementation sites where they do have a shared knowledge base, and maybe that might be shared across certain sectors. But we also want to realize that there may be some implementing sectors that really do have very different knowledge base in the background. I know, for example, with Head Start and Early Head Start, some of the language there is very different from other early childhood sectors, and to have that understanding of that language. Or Part C, early intervention. The role of a program implementation coach is to guide those local leadership teams in their implementation. And we might not get a lot of buy-in from a program implementation coach with just a preschool background supporting a Part C early intervention site. They're going to want someone who's kind of walked in their shoes, has an understanding of their system. And so many of these items you will see mirror what is in the state benchmarks of quality, but we're thinking about it with that sector lens. So, making sure we have a system to recruit and identify who's going to have that role of program implementation coach and trainers. How are we going to set that up? Are they doing it the same? It's 1 to 3 people who are doing training and coaching. Are we divvying that up because we have to think about capacity and how we're using our funding? Um, so we're identifying a process for recruitment because we also want to think about scale up and sustainability as well. Um, and that's with 26. So knowing who is trained, because as you go through the implementation process, you build, each trainer is going to kind of build their capacity to do a training, and then they might train the cohort behind them. And then that's building up another group of trainers who know the materials. So a way to kind of track that, who in your state has that knowledge and ability. Um, and also with 27, developing a sequence of when we bring on a new implementation site, what does their training sequence look like? Who's going to support that training? We also know that in early childhood, there's turnover. People go to new positions. Or leave the field for whatever reason. And so we also have to have a plan for if somebody new comes on, how do we support them to be recruited and to build their capacity along with other trainers? Um, and then we also want to make sure that there are opportunities for their professional development and what that looks like as either a program implementation coach or someone who provides specific training. And then that we have we're looking capacity wise with the number of implementation sites and the capacity of our program implementation coaches to make sure, depending where they are in their implementation journey, that our programs are able to meet regularly with a coach for emerging teams, but kind of also thinking about for established teams, what does that frequency look like based on your capacity? And of course, so this is what Beth was talking about. So for this, what collaboration and coordination can look like with the cross-sector state leadership team would be each sector providing a training calendar to create collaborative cross-sector training opportunities. Because there might be training opportunities that are happening in a sector that maybe, if I'm Head Start and I'm doing a pre-K practices training, the local child cares in my area or public preschool might be able to hop into my training to make sure that we are coordinating and getting people trained.
All right. So now we're going to jump into the sector implementation sites, essential structure. And as we think about the split, we know that a team will have more time and resources to support readiness, exploration, training, implementation, sustaining, and scaling up of an individual program or an agency within the sector, more so than a statewide leadership team that is trying to coordinate work of multiple sectors. The sector implementation benchmarks are similar to the state BOQ, but with I knew I would have trouble sector-specific wording. Really focusing on highlighting readiness, recruitment, implementation, site agreements, with criteria for program implementation coaches, leadership teams, and practitioners and coaches, all the way from that to data collection and sharing. We've seen, especially I've been hearing more about childcare implementation and knowing that that readiness and exploration is so important for the long-term implementation piece. And so when we have those benchmarks of quality, we consider those for the implementation sites and really dig in to helping staff and leadership teams think about all of the pieces that it takes to implement pyramid model. Two benchmarks I just want to highlight that really show the strength of the work of the sector is number 36. The split supports local leadership teams to identify resources for provisions for behavior support, mental health services, and other specialized services that might be needed to assist children with social, emotional, and behavioral support needs in their families. This is a way that the split can support programs to find folks in their community that can support with behavior support or mental health services that might not be easy for a state leadership team to find in a specific community. Another critical element labeled behavior support also is kind of in line with the last critical element, because we have kind of thought making those connections clear so folks know where to get support when they have children with challenging behavior and how to get those services. So item 37, the split establishes a process for implementation sites to access assistance for the provision of behavior support with children with persistent challenging behaviors. Community resources for mental health, behavior, and other services can really be sector specific, looking at it from this point of view, and from identifying services with behavior specialists within communities or agencies or programs. While we know some states do this at the state level with warm lines and behavior consultants, sectors can identify resources locally that might meet the needs of their practitioners, children, and families, or they can also still connect with the state systems and put those systems in place and making sure programs have that access. So you can pop on to my next one. Our most important critical element, of course, is again, in consultation with the SLT on item 40, each sector can identify and coordinate where and how programs and agencies can access prevention, promotion, and intervention services. Ashley mentioned Head Start, who has mental health consultants on staff, and there could be a way that those mental health consultants could work in other places in other ways. Or community childcare might have a behavior support specialist on staff that they could share with other childcares across an area. So it's making sure these are known and being able to access those. And at the state level, making those connections that can lead to community-wide access is really important. And then item 41, the split coordinates with the SLT to employ a technical assistant plan for ongoing support for resources for practitioner coaches and implementation sites to ensure high fidelity of implementation. We have to remember it takes a team to do this work. And we don't only need to support the practitioners and the families and the children, we also need to support the coaches, the program implementation coaches, coaching to support. So coach the coaches and coach the trainers are still an important component of the split BOQ. Ashley, you want to hit data-informed decision-making for our last essential structure?
Yes. And this again is probably one of the most important ones as well, because this kind of shows us, are our plans working the way we planned them, or what changes have to be made? And so if we're thinking of, you know, maybe a team who is part of a larger cross-sector team, there may be one person that is the state data coordinator. However, each sector has as you all probably know by now, have very specific data tools that they may be using. And so there needs to be a system of supports to help programs and program implementation coaches and trainers and practitioner coaches to understand what the tools are, how to use them, what data collection, what the process looks like. So number 43, how frequently are we collecting specific tools? Who's in charge of coordinating that? Um, Communicating to implementation sites, what the data is being collected, why, how it will be used. Um, and then making sure that not only is there a process for collecting the data and communicating the use of the data, but to actually regularly review the data, so that at the sector specific level, maybe where there are certain sus- uh, here we go, sector specific. Say it 5 times fast. Um, barriers that might be happening that have to be addressed through data decision making discussions and problem solving, and action planning to address them. So, one example could be around use of the burrs. Like, so thinking there might be certain outcomes that are sector specific too. So in Part C early intervention, they don't collect the burrs data because that's a measurement for suspension and expulsion. And they have another way of addressing access, that might be not related to their pyramid model work. But so, a public pre-K or childcare or Head Start may be collecting births data to address suspension and expulsion in their system and what that looks like. Whereas in Part C early intervention, they might have a higher priority on measuring family outcomes as it relates to their family outcomes data around the social emotional items to see through implementation of pyramid model, did we see an increase of these outcomes with families? So that's why we have this section, so you can kind of focus on those pieces. And there also, we encourage you to create a sector-specific annual evaluation, just like we do on the cross-sector team, because there may be people within your sector that want that information. How are we going to share outcomes with families or staff? Or maybe future sites we're hoping to engage as we scale up. Back to the most important part, though, is how are we taking those outcomes and sharing that at the state level? Because this is important as well. We might find in these discussions certain patterns that we didn't realize were connected in some way that we could problem solve together. Um, and Also just sharing progress, or maybe it leads to discussion of what resources or trainings are happening that might support those outcomes that the state is looking for, that might lead to cross-sector planning as well. So just making sure there are those constant communication and data feedback loops that are happening, so that we're making sure we aren't siloed and we are communicating of what's happening and everyone feels or has that shared understanding.
Ashley, I'll take this one to start.
Okay.
And I'm hoping our participants, we are small in number out there today, but would love to hear how you have been kind of reflecting on how you can use or adapt this tool for the work in your state. What are ways you can collaborate across your state? Or if you have questions, we haven't had any questions pop into the Q&A today. We'd love to hear from you. We have a few minutes here at the end, so we'll take a moment, pause, and let you share your thoughts. And then we will wrap up with a couple, kind of a share out about what's happening at NTI around some state tools. Ashley, I know you've had a state that has used the split a little bit, has tried it out. Um,
They're about to.
oh, they're about
But
to.
we have had states use prior versions um, of the split um, that I mean, they found it very focused to their work so that they could kind of focus on implementation in their sector. Because as you know, when you're first starting out, like in that installation phase, it can feel really overwhelming trying to juggle all the trainings that are happening and then on top of that, you're trying to get that implemented, but you're also trying to plan for the future. So they found it helped them to focus, and then they felt that it was easier to share back when they did join those larger team meetings about what was happening.
And we have one question, what states are using this currently? I can tell you some states that have looked at it and are starting to either pilot it or you are planning to use it. So I've worked with North Carolina, South Carolina, and Iowa, who have checked it out. Kentucky has also, they are implementing in a public preschool setting and childcare setting and are starting to look at it to help inform the work in each of those settings. In Kentucky, public pre-K has been implementing for a long time, is across multiple public districts and has regional implementation coaches and a lot, and it will definitely has definitely helped them kind of focus in on what they need to continue to focus on that they had not thought about by using just the state leadership team BoQ. And then for the childcare side, they're just really getting underway. And so it's really helped them start to see what that action planning might look like. And so they're just digging into it.
I see that Meredith mentioned Oregon has already, at their last BOQ, began to integrate some of the key indicators from the split. And so for us using these gives our state leadership team the opportunity and data to explore this idea and the concepts more intentionally. That's great feedback, Meredith. I'm excited that you've used it. Um, Oh, okay. So early intervention. Yes. And I will say Michigan is about to use it. There are new t intensive Part C state that we're working with. And so they'll be using it shortly. And like I said, there are many Part C states that have used the prior version of the split that I guess Lisa and I were just kind of like using it was a mesh between the community-wide and the state one and so I know like Montana, North Carolina, Vermont, North Dakota have used those. And those are the states I've worked with. I can't speak for those that have worked with Aaron.
Ashley, if you want to skip the next slide and go to the NTI session, because I think that will kind of connect with Lisa's question as well as love Meredith to come share too. So at NTI, there are two sessions, and I'm going to kind of give you a quick preview and of another new tool that will also enhance the work of the state leadership team. The first session is a 90-minute session, the next level new tools for state leadership team implementation. It's going to do a quick part about the state benchmarks of quality, but also introduce the new tool. And this is a mouthful. I call it resource mapping, but it has a mouthful of words. That is what it's called. It's a cross-sector pyramid model resource mapping, current status and action planning workbook for cross-sector teams. This is going to be in draft form at NTI because we're still working on it. But we've had some really good feedback starting in really looking at resource mapping of who's doing what in each sector. It digs into 6 different topics from ranging from data to funding to coaching and training. It's a complete tool that folks can use as a sector and then bring it back and collaborate cross sector. And then start small, dream big, statewide cross sector implementation. I'm going to shout this out my panel. I mentioned them all, Iowa, North Carolina, and South Carolina. They have started to play with the resource map a little bit, and they've also been doing cross-sector. North Carolina was one of the initial teams that took their state leadership team and went to the cross-sector form, keeping their state leadership team as the advocating coordinating body and working in the sectors. South Carolina is a new and up and coming state. They have just really in the past about 5 years really started to dig in, and Iowa has been doing the same with cross sector. So I'd encourage you to come. The Start Small, Dream Big is a 3-hour session. You will get to dig into the split BOQ as well as the resource mapping, get to talk with both the panel as well as other states about the work. So it's kind of an exciting way to kind of start feeling out these and learn from others as we go. So Ashley, I think that's it for us for today.
Yes, I think we can hand it off to Victor. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so very much to both of our panelists for their wonderful insights. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.